is West Side Legacy Stories. I'm Michaela Kudron, and I'm here with Paul Boudo. So how old are you, Paul?
My goodness sakes, we're getting right to it, aren't we? I just turned 79.
Okay. And how long have you lived in West Springfield?
I got to start and think, 56 years.
So are there any changes you've noticed in town, specifically over that time?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. How much time do we have today? I've been in town since 1961 and seen a lot of different things happen, most all of them for the good. Some of them that didn't work out to the advantage of the town redirected itself and made them work for themselves. But it's been a very interesting series of years with regard to buildings in the community, changes in government, new libraries, new fire stations, you name it. I've seen a lot of it, and I've been involved in several of them.
Yeah, I saw about that. So going back to how you said some of the changes haven't really been the best for the town, can you expand on that a little?
Well, I have to stop and think for just a moment. At one time, we were trying to make a decision on the type of trash pickup we were going to have in town. And over a series of years, we tried different methods until we finally hit on one that worked pretty well for several years, until it fell by the wayside as well and became what we now have today with the weekly pickup and the alternate week trash pickup. That seems to be working pretty well, and when I talk to the former director and the current director of the DPW, they tend to think that it also is working very well.
Okay. So what do you miss most about the way it used to be?
Well, you got to remember, I don't remember a lot of what it used to be because I only showed up on the scene in 1961. I'm sure there'd be, it's hard to do a comparative, quite frankly, knowing that a lot of things have been improved. You know, there's always been issues with traffic in town, and I don't care how far back you go.
Right.
You'll always find somebody that remembers this wasn't the way it used to be, this was better, and so on and so forth. Right up through making the dramatic change in our form of government that we made that the town voted for and adopted on April 1st, 2000, and that's when we changed our government from a representative form of town government to a strong mayor-council type of government, which was the biggest thing that's happened in this town outside of all the other things in years. We had an open town where we had a representative town meeting form of government for 75 years plus, so it was quite a change for a lot of people. And as far as I'm concerned, I think it worked out very well, and some people still talk about it as being okay, and that's fine.
Okay, so what brought you to West Springfield, or your family? Or?
Well, I met this young lady that was a freshman at the Elms College in Chicopee. She was introduced to me through a former friend of mine from high school, and given time and various other things, we ended up getting married in 1961. So that's what brought me to West Springfield.
That's nice. So what was it like when you first moved here?
It was, well, it's hard because I came out of a community, Northampton, just up the river here, 20 miles or so, which was a college town with Smith College and all that. Very heavy into the retail stores on Main Street and various other things in those days. That was the whole downtown, and it's changed quite a bit in 50 years. But what was happening in Northampton was pretty much happening in West Springfield. The cast of players were a little different, but most of the situations that I remember from Northampton in those days, not that I was all that interested in town government at the time, played out to be concerns and issues here in West Springfield as well.
So I know it's something everyone goes through, but it must have been hard leaving your parents. What do you remember most about them?
Oh, golly. Well, I have a brother and I have a sister, and the three of us, mother and dad, they did wonders for what they had at the time, what they encouraged us to do, the values they gave us, and the fact that they insisted, not negotiated, but they insisted that we do certain things certain ways, and most of all be courteous to our elders and other people. It was kind of interesting growing up in Northampton because my grandfather, being the social person he was, and my grandmother, they were great cribbage players and pinochle players. And their favorite partner group was the chief of police and his wife, who were diagonal neighbors on their street. And so it was kind of interesting. Everything was going down, and I was a part of it. Everybody knew about it in the family, except I didn't get to tell them they knew about it when it happened, you know? Not that there was a lot, but it was interesting.
So what are your earliest memories?
Of West Springfield?
Let's start with just earliest memories in general. Northampton, your parents.
Oh, golly. Things we used to do as youngsters? Oh, well, I know that one of the big things when I was getting 6, 7 years of age was to get my own bicycle, because I didn't have one and everybody else did, so I had to do jobs around the house and different other things for the neighbors, and eventually put a few dollars together, and Mom and Dad let me pick out a bike, and then we're off and running. Then they never did see me anymore because I was always on the bike with my buddies and going all over town. We used to, in Northampton, there's one of the township is Florence. Florence has a park called Look Park. And in my day, there was a pool, big Olympic-size pool. And we used to get passes from the Park and Rec department to go up there and get in for no admission. So a lot of our afternoons were spent bicycling all the way up there, swimming and then bicycling back, making sure we got home for dinner. But those are a couple things, and we had a pretty good size playing field right behind the other side of our street, and we played a lot of baseball games, football games down there. In the day, we didn't have a lot of money for baseball gloves and bats and balls. We used to stick in a ball and had more fun than today. Everybody gets so frustrated with the various games they play. I think back, we made a lot of stuff. We improvised a lot of things to have our fun.
More simple?
Yeah, it was a little easier, yeah.
So I know you said you had siblings. Were you guys close, or are you close?
Yeah, we're as close as you can be. Both my brother and sister are living. One lives in Granby, Massachusetts. The other lives in Florence, Mass. They both enjoy reasonably good health. Their families are active, as all families are. And both of them are retired. My sister retired from Smith College, where she was in the administrative office for several years. And my brother was a line foreman for Verizon telephone company. So it was, he had some interesting experiences that he would impart to us.
So what were you like as kids? Like, were you close?
Yeah, we were. Kind of watched out for each other in and among the neighborhood kids and school kids. But my sister is 4 years younger than I am, and my brother's 11 years younger.
Wow.
So it used to be very interesting at times. My brother used to say that he couldn't do much of anything because he had 4 parents watching him all the time. And I says, well, that wasn't true, because as he grew up, we were able to talk him out of that comment. But we had a good time. We lived in Northampton, right off Elm Street. Diagonally across Elm Street was Childs Park, which is a pretty nice place. And we spent a lot of hours over there just as kids running around having a good time or playing ball or whatever else.
So I'm sure you had to take care of your sibling a lot. I mean, 11 years.
Yeah, we did. My mom was fortunate, and she didn't have to work when we were at that age. But we did. It was part of the routine.
So what was school like for you?
Next question. I enjoyed school to a degree. And nobody really runs up and down the street and say, I really like spelling. I really liked I can't say that I was that kind of a student. I knew that that was my job in life, was to go to school and get educated, and I did. And I always was able to obtain reasonably good grades. And as things got going on, my dad owned his own business, so when I got old enough and big enough to help him, I was working with him most of the time, after school, weekends, and things like that, which proved, as I look back on it today, was a very, very interesting and valuable lesson.
So what were some of your best memories, grade school, high school?
Oh, golly. Well, I joined the Cub Scouts when I was a youngster and enjoyed that very much. It covered a lot of the different things that you would think Cub Scouts would, knot tying, fishing, camping, all that stuff. And I stuck with it as I became old enough to become a Boy Scout. And I was a Boy Scout. I was a Boy Scout right up until my senior year in high school. And when I was a freshman in high school, the parish had sponsored the troop that I belonged to. And they decided that it would be a good idea if this parish could sponsor one, maybe two of the scouts to attend the international jamboree, Boy Scout Jamboree in California, Santa Ana, California. And so we worked. I mean, we collected newspapers. We did whatever we could figure out to make a few dollars and put it into the treasury of the troop. And day came that the scoutmaster said he was going to make an announcement as to who was going. And so we're all excited, and it was funny because nobody was really working. Well, I'm going to go and I'm going to get enough. We're all just working, doing whatever we had to do. Our mothers would have bake sales and things like that, and we'd have to go and set up the tables and clean it up afterwards, things like that. Never anybody during the whole thing, all the collections we made, never remember anybody saying, well, I'm going to win, or I'm going to be. It was a true troop effort. And then the night we used to have suppers, church suppers, and this one particular supper, that was the one that the scoutmaster was going to announce who was going to California. And so he got up and he announced, and he said, he said, we had an awful time. We couldn't pick one, we had to pick two. And so he said, Paul Boudo and Paul Valancourt are going. I almost fell on the floor. But he was a buddy of mine, lived on the next street. We used to peddle papers together and things like that. So the two of us boarded a train downtown Northampton, and we, the whole month of July, 1952 it was, we went to California and back. We went out the southern route, spent 10 days encamped out there in the National Jamboree, and came back the northern route to home. It was quite an experience. I mean, we stopped numerous places on the way out. And I remember coming back, we stopped in, I believe it was Reno, Nevada, or Las Vegas. I don't remember which one it was, but it was one of the gambling casinos, meccas, and everybody wanted to get some silver dollars. So we were changing our money into silver dollars until we found out it weighed quite a bit to lug around 10 or more dollars in your pocket of heavy silver, so that didn't last long. But we had a great time, a lot of memories. I still bump into one or two of the fellas that were on that trip. Made a tremendous impression on me and Paul, and of course we were able to talk about it afterwards for quite a long time.
So did you ever make it to Eagle Scout in your
I never did.
time?
No, I made it to, I was a couple of badges short of getting my life badge, but then I was older now and I was working a lot more, so it kind of had to separate, but I never got my Eagle.
So did you do any other kinds of jobs as a kid besides working with your
Well,
father?
when your father has his own business, and that's the family business, you probably don't have much of a chance to work anywhere else, although he had a landscaping and tree service company. The landscaping was kind of a summer thing. The tree service was pretty much April through October. In the winter, it kind of slowed down. He used to plow snow and shovel snow for his customers. But in the wintertime, many winters I took a job. One year, a couple of years, I worked at the A&P. And Atlantic, it's like a big Y today. I have to forget for a second here. But I worked there for a couple of winters. Worked at a local pharmacy for one winter. It was a good experience, but it was interesting. I thought, well, gee, this is really great. It was more. I used to enjoy working for my dad more than working in these other places. Not that anybody treated me badly. It was just kind of different when you worked for your family business,
Yeah, yeah. So how was it different specifically?
Well, when I worked in the family business, I had one boss. And when you worked for these other organizations, you had multiple bosses. And sometimes that got to be a little bit contradictory, depending on their talent as a boss. That was the big thing. I mean, sometimes people got impressed with the fact that they were the boss and you were the stock clerk, floor
Right.
sweeper, or whatever. That was interesting to me, and I just took it in a grain of salt and remembered it when I went back to work with my dad during the season. And of course, sometimes everything that went wrong, I had a hand in it. I just can't understand. Sometimes I wasn't even there. But he was a hard-working guy. Oh my goodness, he worked hard. But we had a good time. And we had a good life.
So with Cub Scouts and these odd jobs and
Yeah.
working with your dad, what did you want to be as a kid?
Well, it was always assumed that I was going to go to UMass Stockbridge, which was the horticultural school then, still is today, and take that. But I didn't really, I liked it, but I didn't like it that much. And in high school, I focused on the business subjects in a general course. And I got into bookkeeping and all that kind of thing. And that really kind of excited me with regard to how that all worked and record keeping and things like that. So when I left high school, I ended up going to Northampton Commercial College, which is no longer in existence. And then I went from there, took my first job, worked a couple of years, and I went back to school nights at AIC in Springfield. And I graduated a few years later. But that was how I left the horticultural industry, shall we say, and went on to something different.
Well, I know you've been successful in business, but any other
I hope so.
any other careers that you've done, like as an adult?
I've had a few. My wife, God love her, she'll tell you. My goodness, when I worked for a bank for 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it was when I joined. It was called Valley Bank, and over the years it became mergers and so on and so forth. It was the formation of the Union Trust and Springfield National Bank in Springfield, and that's when I joined them in 1960. They were owned by a holding company in Boston called the Bay State Holding Corporation, but we didn't want to tell anybody that we were owned by somebody else because up in good old provincial New England, that wasn't something you wanted to admit. But it was a very interesting career because I found a lot of interesting cross sections in the road. Excuse me. Learned a lot. Met a lot of people. Was always found it quite challenging to try to keep the customers happy and the employees happy and have all that work out.
What exactly did you do while working in the bank?
Well, I was hired as a teller trainee, and over the years I progressed to being a head teller. And we had 22, 23 offices, so I used to get to work in the different offices on vacation schedules and things like that. Eventually I became an assistant manager in the Indian Orchard office, which was one of our larger offices at the time. And the gentleman that ran the office, he and I worked well together. He would be looking out canvassing the customers and paying attention to our own customers. And he decided that he would recommend the bank open a new office in Ludlow. And so bank did all the investigative things they do and said that that's a good idea. and they asked him who he would recommend be the manager of that office. And he said, well, Paul, who else? So that's how I got to get into management.
Wow.
And so we opened that office in 1970, ooh, golly, I have to stop and think now, 72, 73, somewhere in there. And that was the only commercial bank in town. We had one big competitor, Ludlow Savings Bank at the time. And that's how I got from the employee route into the management routine. I was started back to school nights, and I was also asked by the bank if I would like to attend the Mass Bankers School of Banking at Williams College up in Williams, Massachusetts. And I said, wow, sure, of course I would. So I went there for 2 years. It was it wasn't full-time there. It was go for a couple of weeks and then do homework or papers and things and then go back. But I did that. And that led me to opportunities now to get into the loan function of the bank. And that was really exciting because I always looked to the loan officers, that's a pretty good job. And, well, when I found out what you had to do to be a loan officer, it was more of a challenge than I thought, but never being one to avoid a challenge, I went down that road, and eventually I became a loan officer in the main office in the commercial lending department. And that was very, very interesting because then I got to deal with the senior lending staff, and they usually had the bigger credits that the bank had. So I got to do. I was the errand boy a lot of times. But boy, you learn a lot when you're doing that part. Mm-hmm. And over the years, different positions opened up. The bank had purchased the First National Bank of Westfield and made it a branch office, so that we had to matriculate all the bookkeeping and all that into the main office. I didn't have anything to do with that, but I went over there when the manager retired, and that was probably the largest responsibility in the branch office we had at the time. And when he retired, I got to replace him. I became a vice president of the bank and a lending officer. And I had another office on the north side of town that reported to me. And so we started a whole new routine, a whole new avenue in my life. But it was interesting because I was really challenged there because everybody that worked in that, or most everybody who worked in that office, worked for the old bank before we bought it. And a lot of the folks felt that, well, the old way was the best way. The new way is not as good. Mm-hmm. And of course, we're interfacing electronic banking, as we called it in those days, with the manual postronics that they used to sit at a keyboard and put in the information, checks and debits to the customers' accounts. And we were converting all that to the early computers that we had in those days, which took a whole floor of the main office because it was so large.
Wow.
So that was kind of an interesting part of my career, and moved that along. And then they asked me if I wouldn't step up and go back into the commercial lending office in Springfield in a vice president position. So I did that as well. But I was starting to get a little bit uneasy. Mm-hmm. I wasn't sure where my next step was. Not that I was overly qualified for anything. I wasn't that. It was just I was looking for, what do I set for my goal? I want to be president of the bank? That would have been a lofty goal. But the interesting thing is the president of the bank was younger than I was, and there's a lot of motion among the senior staff. And I said, well, I'll just sit and wait my turn and see what happens. And I started looking a little bit outside the bank because I said, I've loaned money to a lot of companies and a lot of ideas, and they've succeeded many times in spite of themselves. So I said, I think maybe I'm going to start looking to leave the bank and do something on my own. So I sat down with Barbara and we talked it all through and one thing or another, and the upshot of it was that I gave my notice after 20 years. and I joined in partnership with an old friend of mine, and he owned some Midas muffler shops at the time. And so between Bill and I, we ended up buying 2 Amco transmission shops. So we ended up in the automotive repair business, aftermarket business, by buying Midas and Amco in this area. One of the other ones that I ended up buying on my own was a Goodyear franchise. So I went from finance to repairing automobiles. Everybody said, "Wow, gee, you know anything about that?" And I said, "Well, I've done a little bit of it, but that's not why I bought them. I bought them to serve as a customer that has a need." And I figured that between Bill, my partner, and I, we could hire the appropriate people that were talented enough to do the work. So that was what we did for 5-6 years. After a while, I said, "Well, this was fine," but a lot of people would ask me, "Well, gee, you left the bank and you bought a business, and you must really know how to buy a business and how to select a good one." And I said, "Well, you would think so, but it isn't that easy." Well, different people would consult with me and ask me about different things that they were trying to buy. And so I said, "I think there's a business in this." And there was. It was called business brokerage. And that was really exciting back in the early 80s, up to about 84, 85. There was a couple of franchises that were trying to get going. So anyway, I sold my interest out to my partner's son, and I opened up a business brokerage. And I bought and sold small businesses for 26, 27 years after that. Small companies up and down the Pioneer Valley, mostly Western Mass, Greater Springfield, few in Connecticut. Very interesting. You get a pretty good cross-section of that. And in all of that, we did a lot of our transfers were real estate orientated. So if you expect to be paid a commission in the state of Massachusetts, state of Connecticut, and most other states, you have to be a licensed real estate broker to do that. So I joined up with a real estate firm, Smith & Reynolds in Springfield, and worked with them, got my license, got my broker's license, and I'm still using that broker's license today. But I ran that business brokerage. We did pretty well for 27 years.
Wow.
And I'll stop there because I could go on,
So what advice do you have for people now who want to open a small business themselves?
Well, don't be afraid to do it. Just make sure you do your homework. You've got to look at the angles. You've got to study what you're trying to do. It's not easy. It never was easy. But today we tend to think that, well, I can sit at my computer and I can learn everything I need to know to do this kind of a business or something like that. It's not that easy. You do have a certain amount of interaction with other people that know the business. Some of the small companies and medium-sized companies I sold, many of them did extremely well because in the new sale, when the new owner came in, they sat down, they made business plans, and their accountants and their attorneys made sure they followed those business plans. So that was a big thing with what we used to do as business brokerage. We try to make sure that people walked in with their eyes wide open, not just that it's going to be Charlie Jones's shop or whatever the business was. We wanted to make sure when we consummated a transaction that it was a business that was viable and that the candidate that was going into it understood it and realized that there wasn't a pot of gold sitting somewhere in there and he just had to find it. Pot of gold was right here. He had to figure out how to put this to work to make to achieve his dreams.
So to reverse it a little, what like life lessons has your work life taught you?
Boy, how much time do we have? Well, that's an excellent question. That's excellent. Be true to yourself. Examine what you're doing and understand as best you can. When you don't understand, seek help. And don't just seek help from a friend or somebody like that, seek help from experienced, talented, and credentialed people. Because if you're going to buy a business, you've got to know as much about that business as you can possibly know before you hand over your money and take the keys. The success we enjoyed was because we had a very good working relationship with the accounting CPA profession in this marketplace, the legal profession. The insurance profession was another part of that. You know, a lot of people buy a business and don't have the proper insurance on it. If they're not careful, they can run into a real problem, all because they didn't want to spend that money on insurance or something like that, for instance. But, you know, make a plan and work it. That's a trite old phrase, but you're going to be discouraged. You're going to have to back up and take another route now and then. But in the end, you look back and you say, well, I examined the opportunity. I took the two directions I could have taken. I chose this one. It worked.
So if you could do anything now, career-wise, what would it be?
Well, now that I'm unretired for the second time, what would it be? Oh, golly, I don't think I have many choices left. Wow, what would it be? Gee, you know, done pretty much everything I wanted to do. You know, would I like to have a place at the beach or a place at the mountain? I can't even take care of the little house we've got. and I watch members of my family struggle with a summer cottage and a house, and, you know, that's a lot of work. I don't know, I went back in, I retired from business brokerage in 2012, I think it was, and I lasted about a year. And the second year after that, I was even getting more antsy, if you will. So I called up a friend of mine who was in commercial real estate, and I asked him, I said, can you use somebody? You know, I'm not sure do full-time, part-time, but I just got to have something to do, a place to go. And so he hired me. And so I started back into strictly real estate, commercial industrial real estate, and that's what I'm doing today. People say, are you retired? I says, I think I retired a long time ago. I just haven't worked a day in my life since. You got to do what you like. You got to, if you don't know what you're doing, then you got to learn how to do it right, and then you'll be fine. But there's a lot of opportunities out there. Retirement to me is always kind of, I always thought it would be a big thing. 65, I'm going to retire. Boy, I'm going to, you know. But you know, I found a lot of people that get to 65 and retire, and they take on a sedentary life, and then all of a sudden they got issues, health issues and all kinds of stuff. So my wife and I have been blessed. She's an organist. She was a teacher. She was a teacher for many years, retired, and she was always playing the organ and things like that. She still does. She for our own church, and she gets every once in a while she has different opportunities to play other places. So the two of us keep kind of busy, and the kids laugh because if they want to do something, they call up mom and dad, and we have to check our schedules. But no, what would I do? I'm doing what I want to do. I don't see myself retired, really. People I work with are great because I don't have a schedule as an independent contractor. I put in the hours that I want to put in and take care of things, help where I can. And it gives me interesting income, but it also presents a fair amount of challenges.
Well, that's good, definitely. So speaking of challenges, were you affected or your family affected by the Great Depression?
Yeah, I was told we were, but I never saw it. I was born in '38, so I got the tail end of it. And,
right.
But you know, I never knew that we didn't have a lot of money. I mean, we always had a meal on the table. We always had everybody that had a birthday. I don't care what day of the week it was on, that was their birthday. Mother always had a special supper that night, and we had birthday cake and Christmas. We always had our special request. Sometimes we got it, sometimes we didn't. But I don't think we ever did without a lot of stuff. Some of our friends, oh yeah, they had a lot of different things, and they went places, and I don't know. My sister, brother, and I, we did all right. We fortunately we had two parents who really cared and gave us good life lessons, and I think we did well.
So going on with the historical kind of thing, did the Civil War affect your family greatly?
Now wait a minute, I'm not that.
Oh,
old.
I'm sorry, I said the wrong thing.
I can't.
World War II.
Well, now that you brought it up, I had an uncle. My uncle Stephen was a doughboy in the First World War. Now, when I was growing up, I knew Uncle Steve was in the Army, but he never talked about it, and nobody said much about it. And it wasn't until I was much older that I understood why, because he witnessed the carnage of war. And he was an infantryman, and it was, I guess, pretty gruesome. And my other uncle, Francis, he was an accountant type person. And when he went in, they found out he could make numbers add up and subtract, so he ended up in the accounting side. I can't think of the name of it now, but anyway, that's what he did for his tour duty. But that's the effect we had. The other thing that was kind of interesting, when I was a youngster, Second World War was going pretty strong. My father was a air raid warden, and we used to have to, the headlights on your car, in the old days they were kind of a bullet type of thing, and it had a lens on it. And we had to tape over the top half of the light so that when you were driving down the street, they couldn't see the light from the airplane, would reduce the shining of the lights on the road. So that was one thing. But every time the air raid sirens would go off, my dad would grab his helmet, his flashlight, and his whistle, and he beelined it right up to the corner of Vernon Street at Elm Street. That was his post. And they would just make people go home, get off the streets, and do what they could to make sure that if anything did happen, they would facilitate the people getting protected. But that was my closeness with that. Civil War, no, I've read some books. In fact, I'm reading a really pretty good book right now. In fact, the whole thing with the Civil War is very fascinating to me. And we had a president at the time who, oh, I'll tell you, he was a marvel. Anyway, I don't want to get off that one.
So any other historical significance, Vietnam, the space program, you know?
No. My particular background is I spent 8 years in the Massachusetts Army National Guard. I was a sergeant. I was a forward observer, and then I got to be a platoon leader, not platoon leader, squadron leader in a company, infantry company, and we had 81 millimeter mortars and 102 recoilless rifles, that kind of thing. I never saw active duty. Went to camp every summer. I spent a couple of times. I went to mass military for a while. Went to Benning, Georgia for a while, but I didn't want to go through the routine of getting that behind me so I could have another bigger rank or so. I was starting to have a bunch of babies at the house, and I figured I better be around there for them, you know. But that was my brush with the military. It was a good brush. It was interesting.
So, women's rights, environmental movements, like all this stuff, how did you, like, what was the period like for you? Where did you stand?
Well, I'm trying to remember what some of the issues were at the time. Well, we had one of the things that was going on pretty hot and heavy at the time was Martin Luther King.
Right.
And his movement to help the black people, and it was very concerning to most everybody. I don't know how you could be in this country and not be concerned about what was happening. And it's very interesting to me today to see what's happening with all the ethnicities and what they're doing, not doing, where they came from. And I look back at what Martin Luther King and other people did to try to make a life for their brothers and sisters. I don't see a lot of that anymore. We probably see it in our own families, our own communities, but a lot of the upheaval that's going on, I never had time to do that. I mean, when I was a youngster at home, I was either in school, home doing my homework, or working for Dad. And a lot of times I think if all these folks that have all this time to go out and demonstrate and things like that, if they had that kind of thing going on, maybe we wouldn't have so many of them, It's, but that was the big thing that I remember now. Vietnam, I didn't have anything to involve with that at all. But I do remember Dr. King and the cause he had.
So we're going to switch to family again, and I know you said you met your wife at, was it Elms College?
I met my wife because of a friend of mine who graduated with me from high school, and she said to me, Paul, one of my classmates at the Elms, I think you'd like her. I said, okay. And so that's how I met my wife. I was introduced to her on a blind date.
So which relatives were you closest with as a kid, now?
Well, my father had 7 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
And they, all but 2 of them, lived pretty much in the greater Northampton area. My mother was an only child, but her father and mother had sisters and brothers, so we had relatives there. They were most of them down in Connecticut. But it was primarily the 4 brothers and sisters that were up here or were up in Northampton area that we kind of called our family. Anytime we were gathering anybody together, they all show up, and all the kids. And, but that was kind of the immediate family at the time.
Do you remember stories you used to tell, or jokes, songs, family traditions?
But we're on television now. Oh, there was always somebody had a story to tell or something like that. None of them jump right out at me now. But in those days, we had the radio, and we listened to the news, and there were certain programs that were every Tuesday night at 7 or something like that. But that was it. The movies were a big thing. We go to the movies on a Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon. But we didn't have the tremendous audio-visual experiences that everybody has today. But we had an immediate family that were pretty tight. And they used to watch out for each other, if somebody was ill or something, they were always taking care of somebody, The neighborhood was like that too. I can remember growing up that when I'd come home from school, or my sister or brother did, there might be a note on the door that Mom was gone somewhere, shopping, if whatever, and we were to go over, and Mrs. Denny was going to watch us for the afternoon. So we'd trot our little selves across the street, and Mrs. Denny would be waiting for us. That was a good place to go. She made the greatest cookies. But that's how they were always watching out for each other. And I can remember a couple of different times when either my brother, sister, or I were sick in the middle of the night, and lights would go on, and invariably the phone would ring, and it would be Mrs. Turbin, Mrs. Saltzgiver, Mrs. Denny. You need anything? Everything okay? Do I have to come over and help you? You don't get that anymore. I mean, I don't know in our neighborhood. I can't name a dozen families, and in a way it's kind of sad. But in the other way, well, I suppose that's the way it is today.
Yeah.
But in those days, everybody was pretty much watching out for everybody else, And if my father would be, if there was somebody who was ill, usually it was the husband that took care of the yard and the wife took care of the laundry and stuff. Well, if one of the fathers on the street was sick, Dad would go over, mow the grass, take his guys over, clean it all up, that kind of stuff. I'm sure it still happens today, but in those days it always made a big impression on me. Just let me know that I had a responsibility other than to my own family and the neighborhood.
So switching topics again, can you tell me about some of the other organizations you've been involved with? The civic associations, like the Lions Club, the Rotary Club, sorry.
Whoa, oh my goodness. What shall we do? We have to have you come to Rotary and have lunch with us someday, and we'll start our course, and if we can get the membership chairman to give you an application, it'd be all set. I've been very active in civic areas for years, and it all started in my banking days. I remember when I was first made a head teller and assistant manager in that little window there, I was called, my boss called me up one day, or the vice president of the branch system called me up. He said, Mr. Leeson would like to see you tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp. Moi, you know? Mr. Leeson was the president of the bank. And here I was a head teller, or I forget, I think that's what I was. And he'd like to see you. Okay, so down I go, and I'm sitting there 7:45, and I'm waiting, because I didn't want to be late for this one. And as I suspected, 5 minutes to 8, he comes walking in, and, oh, hi, Paul, come on in, sit down. I'm thinking, oh, gee, I'm going to go into Never Never Land in here, the president's office. I wonder what's going to happen now. Must be getting fired, you know. But he talked to me a little bit, and the executive vice president, Mr. King, he asked him to come in. We sat down, and they tried to tell me how they saw our bank interacting with the community, and how it was our responsibility as bankers and business people to give some time to this effort. However that was supposed to go, they wanted me to know if I chose to do those kind of things that the bank would support me financially and otherwise. I thanked them very much, and I got back in the car, went back to the branch I was working in, and I'm thinking, you know, what did I do, you know? But as I thought about it a little bit, I said, you know, I got a feeling something's going to start happening for me, and it did. That's when I was made an assistant manager at one of our larger offices, and encouraged to go out and get involved in the Chamber of Commerce, the JCs at the time. And that's how I started, and I just never stopped. It kind of gets in your blood. It's an excellent way to meet your business peers in the community. And it's been quite a rewarding experience over the years to me personally. And I've always hoped that I've been able to give back enough to offset what I've taken from that. Not that I ever looked to take anything per se, but I figure there's a quid pro quo in all this. But I've been involved in several organizations, as you could see from my outline. Chamber has always been very high on my list. Rotary is, again, I got involved in Rotary in 1972, and it's just been a great experience. Met a lot of wonderful people, learned a lot of things I never would have had exposure to. And it's just been, and you know, and politically, I got involved, as I said early on. First committee I ever served on was the Fire Station Building Committee in the town of West Springfield, the headquarters building. And from there, it just kept going. You know, I got on the school committee. I served all kinds of different jobs, as you probably recognize. It's an interesting way to involve yourself in the community. That's all part of the job.
What were some big projects you worked on specifically?
Well, there was several different ones. There are a few that jump right out at me. One of the things that I recall very vividly is when I was on the school committee. We had our buildings were very old, and some of them were not capable of giving our staff the venue to deliver the educational quality that the students should be getting. And of course, everybody thought that this, that, and the other was the right way to go, but we did know that our system then called for a K through 8, and then 9 through 12. But 7 and 8 were junior high, and we put those students in the old high school building, and then we had the high school up the backside of this building. But we knew at the time that we really had to look at the future of the middle school, the middle grades, 6, 7, and 8. And our superintendent at the time, Bill O'Shea, the principal of the junior high, Skip Birdie, started drawing plans and drafting different things that would work and wouldn't work. Well, long story short, it took us 8 years to get the town meeting to approve the funding of a new middle school.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happened, I was off the school committee, but I was asked to come back and sit on the building committee. And so I did. I spent 8 years sitting on that committee. I ended up as chairman of it. And we built the middle school, which is up on the backside of this
Mm-hmm.
school here. And it opened in 1989. It's 27 years old now. It goes by quick, let me tell you. But that was a really very interesting, challenging opportunity because it was not easily won, the battle for getting the funding and so on and so forth. That was one that sticks right out in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
There's several others. The biggest one that I had the privilege of participating in was we had the representative form of town meeting, form of government. And that was, I thought, along with others, that it had kind of outlived its usefulness.
Mm-hmm.
We were having trouble getting quorums at meetings. We would have the moderator would deputize us, some of the town meeting members, to go with a policeman and go to these people's homes and get them to come to the town meeting because they were elected to be there. They should be there. Anyway, a lot of different things were happening with that. And a couple of us got together and we said, hey, we've got to figure out a way to change the government because
Mm-hmm.
the government we're using is incapable of dealing with the times that we're in. We need to concentrate the focus a little bit closer than we had 295 town meeting members that were running
Mm-hmm.
the town. And of course you have selectmen and all this, but the vote of the town meeting was the magic. So we, three of us started out door to door, getting signatures on a referendum ballot. And the interesting thing was we were criticized severely by several people. We didn't have a referendum ballot that said, do you want to change the government for West Springfield? Or what do you want to change it to?
Mm-hmm.
That had been tried before and it failed miserably. One of our members of the small little group of 3 or 4, he said, we just have to get something in front of the people that says, are you interested in changing the form of government or something like that? And what happened is we were advocating for the appointment of a charter commission. And the charter commission's job would then be to investigate the various types of government and then come back with a recommendation to the citizens of West Springfield and say, this is what we've chosen to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we did. And it surprised us because it passed they accepted that routine right away. First ballot, it was passed. And it also elected 9 members of a charter commission. And they had 2 years to look at all these different avenues of municipal government. And they came back with a recommendation. And the recommendation was for a strong mayor-council form of government, which we have now. And they had open meetings and it was discussed. And, I got kind of, we used to hear, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see where a lot of folks would say that. But anyway, it went to the ballot question was put on the April 1st ballot, 2000, and it passed like 60%.
Mm-hmm.
So that got us off and running. So then we had another election. We had our first council and our first mayor and our first school committee. But that was a real challenge, and that was exciting to be part of it. And then I had the good fortune to get elected to that first council, and I served on it for 10 years, or its successors. They were only 2 years at a time. But that was really quite a highlight in my personal career, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And
So is there anything else you want to add about being a part of the town council?
Yep. Well, I had, as a counselor, you have different opportunities to bring legislation forward. And I've always been a big advocate of economic development. Even before we changed the government around on the Chamber of Commerce, I always try to get involved with the Economic Development Committee, things that were dealing with the growth and development of the economy of a town or city, whatever. And on the council was no different. One of the first things that I was able to get legislatively approved was the TIF program, the Tax Incentive Financing Program, which is a program that communities can offer to a business that's trying to build a new building, come to town, or expand their own building, and they give them some financial incentives to do that through that TIF program. That was one of them. The other one was the Economic Development Committee for the town. It was one of my favorite little subjects, and I got the town to formalize a committee, Economic Development Committee, and we call it the Redevelopment Authority, and that had to do with redeveloping the town, developing new structures and business and things like that. And that passed. And on the council, I don't know if you've ever seen a town council meeting, but we have, you just watch it, don't go to.
I have
watch
friends in it, but.
Yeah. Well, watch it sometime. It's an education in human interaction. But we have a speak out program. I'm still on it. We have a speak out portion of the meeting, and that's when a citizen can get up at the microphone and say whatever they want to say, and they've got 5 minutes to say it. And at 4 minutes, the clerk to the council waves a yellow piece of paper saying you get 1 minute left to wrap it up, otherwise you're out of there. And they try to push it a little longer, but they were always pretty good in keeping that way. But we were constantly being reminded that Agawam was so much better than we were. And why? Because Agawam was building parks, and they were doing all kinds of things with growth and development and parks and housing, and it was all because they had adopted an act, Massachusetts General Law 44B, which is the Community Preservation Act. And that gives the community who adopts it the opportunity to place a surcharge on the real estate taxes being paid on a property. That money goes into a pool, and that pool is administrated by a committee, Community Preservation Committee, and they can invest that money into open space, historic renovation, and housing. And so I just listened enough to it, and I knew what the background was as to why we didn't adopt it when we could have in 2002. So I decided to push that along pretty well, and we got the council to appoint a committee of the council with me as chairman. Anyway, we did the research, we had a committee formed, we worked 6 months on it, we came back to the council in June of 2008, and we said, here's our proposal. Number one, we think that the town deserves to be part of the Community Preservation Act. Number two, here's all the things we can do with funds that are accumulated that way. And number three, we think it's going to offer a unique way to develop some of the things in town that our budget won't cover. And so it went on the ballot in November of '08, passed 55%. So that meant the following January it became law. So 2009 they were organizing the committee and so on and so forth. And so that's what happened with that. And 2009, 2010 was my last year on the council. One of the rules in the council is that you serve and you have to wait a year before you can serve on any other appointed committee. So I waited out the year. I would go to the community preservation meetings, and when the year was up, I asked the mayor, Mayor Gibson at the time, I said, I'd like to be appointed to the Community Preservation Committee, and he said, yeah, okay, fine. And he did, and I've been there ever since. I've done a lot of interesting things. We've done well, let's see, the first year we funded was 2010-11. We've done 17 projects. They are worth a little over $3 million. Much of the $3 million was a 50-50 split. People come in and they want $100,000 to do something. And we ask if they've exhausted all the other opportunities for funding that are available to municipalities. And if they did, fine. If they didn't, then we ask them to please go try to find some more money, because what you're going to do is help us double our money. So we're not depleting the well. So they've done that. And there's only a couple of cases, and they were municipal projects that we did 100% funding. One was the reconstruction of the trees and plantings on the town common after the tornado and the microburst 6-7 years ago. All the trees were torn up and things like that, and the FEMA people came through and they cut all the branches that were broken, and that was the end of it. So we put another $58,000, I think it was, into cleaning them up, really pruning them professionally, and then we planted about 20 more trees. So things like that have been very exciting. And we've got some things coming now that are going to be different for the town, and I think the CPA money will be well spent to the betterment of the citizens.
So our next section is reflections. So who do you think of as the most important person in your life?
Well, the lady I'm married to puts up with a lot, so she'd have to be. No, she's very, very interesting lady. She's raised 5 kids, 6. But she's stuck with a lot of the stuff that I've done, and it's a couple of times. She, but that's really one of the top of my list. Another one is my father. He was a very hard worker, very strict disciplinarian. I learned a lot from him, and every once in a while he comes back. And those are a couple things, and then I look at the 5 children we have. I'm always learning something new from them, and now I'm learning from their children. Oh my goodness! It's kind of an interesting thing when you look at the world through your grandchild's eyes. Oh my goodness! They don't miss a beat.
I'm sure it's hard to pick, but what was the happiest moment of your life?
Oh boy. That's a pretty good one. Well, I would say perhaps it would be, I've really got 6 of them.
6 is good.
First one is July 8th, 1961. That's the day I married my wife. And then I have 5 right after that, and that's the birth of our 5 children. And boy, does that open your eyes. Those are for me. Those are really important and outstanding. There's a bunch of other things too, but those are the things that always seem to bring it back and focus it as to what we're all doing here and where we're going.
What are the most important lessons you've learned in life?
Don't volunteer. Oh golly. Well, the lessons you have to learn, because if you get starting, you get out involved in your job and the community work of all kinds, you have to know when to say no. Because once the people, general public, know that if you're doing the job, it's going to be done right, it's going to be funded, it's this, that, and the other, then everybody's asking you to do this, that, and the other. So eventually you kind of set some priorities, and you start picking and choosing the things that you feel are going to be best for your family and yourself. And sometimes I ended up taking on too much, and I paid for it because I really had to do a very, very thorough job of making sure I didn't screw up anything. But no, you have to be careful of what you're out there volunteering to do. But the big thing when you do volunteer is volunteer and do the job. Don't just volunteer to say, well, I'm going to a meeting or I'm on this committee. If you're going to do it, be serious and do it right. I always used to, I say, boy, I got my father looking over my shoulder. I got to do it right. And if he doesn't get at me, my mother will. So. But that was, and I see that a lot of times. People get involved in community work, political work, and they don't take it down to the serious level that they should. In other words, okay, I've asked for this challenge, I'm going to do it. I don't want to just have my name attached to it. So do the job.
What are you proudest of in your life?
Oh, golly. I made it this far. Well, I just told you about 6 of them. That's the group of 6, I'll tell you, we had some fun times. And, you know, it's always interesting when you reflect back, you're always thinking about who did whatever they did, you know, and it's, that's I don't know, I'm pretty proud of that. There were times that I wondered how the heck we were going to get through all that, but yeah, we did. And the kids they're out there doing their thing, and I can see some of the attitudes that I suggested to our children being suggested to our grandchildren by their parents. That's kind of an interesting observation. I don't know, I've always figured I'd try to do more than what I had to do. I mean, just because I live here doesn't give me a right to do much other than live here. So if I can contribute something to the community, to the church, to the whatever, I figure that's part of, you know, that's why you're signing on this trip. And you got to make sure you spread it out a little bit.
So is there anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to? Or that I stopped it too quickly?
Well, I think you did a pretty thorough job. There, perhaps maybe one thing that people should, especially the young people, I mean young people, you know, yourself included, you know, there's a lot of good opportunities, and you're going to be looking at opportunities for jobs and things like that. But remember, you owe your family and your community some time and effort, and try to make balance all 3 of them, and you'll do well.
And we have one more question. How would you most like to be remembered?
That's a good question. Very good question. Well, I think that you know, all the different things that I've done, if people would think back and say, well, he looked at all the facts and he was fair in his judgment.
Thank you, Paul, for meeting us today. My name is Michaela Kudron, and this is Westside Legacy Stories. Tune in next time.